Eleanor Winters pressed her face into a stranger's chest and sobbed. Not because she was sad, but because for the first time in 6 years, someone had caught her before she hit the ground. She didn't know his name. She didn't know he was an earl. She didn't know that the red wine now bleeding across his white evening coat would cost her everything she had, and give her everything she never dared to want. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. If you're new here, subscribe and follow this story to the very end. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. Eleanor Winters hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. She stood in the back workroom of Mrs. Calloway's dress shop on Brewer Street, stitching pearl buttons onto a wedding gown she would never wear for a bride she would never meet, and tried not to think about how hungry she was. The clock above the door said 4:30. She'd been sewing since 6. Her fingers ached. Her shoulders burned. A thin line of blood ran from a needle prick on her left thumb, but she didn't stop. You didn't stop at Mrs. Calloway's. You stopped when Mrs. Calloway told you to stop. "Eleanor," she looked up. Mrs. Calloway stood in the doorway, arms folded, mouth set in a line that meant trouble. "Your brother's here again." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "Tell him I'm busy." "I told him that. He said it's urgent." Mrs. Calloway's voice softened, just barely. "He looks rough, Eleanor. Worse than last time." Eleanor set down the needle, wiped the blood on her apron, walked through the shop to the front door, where Daniel Winters stood on the pavement, looking like he'd slept in his clothes. Because he probably had. He was 26. He looked 40. "Before you say anything," Daniel started, "how much?" "Eleanor, how much do you owe this time, Daniel?" He shoved his hands into his pockets, looked at the ground. 14 pounds. The number hit her like a slap. 14 pounds. She made 8 shillings a week. 14 pounds was 4 months of work, and that was before rent, before food, before the medicine their father needed for his lungs, before the coal they'd need when winter came. "To who?" she asked, her voice flat. "Marcus Hawley." "No." Eleanor stepped back. "No, not him. Daniel, you promised me. After last time, you looked me in the eyes and promised." "I know what I promised." "Then why are you standing here telling me you owe Marcus Hawley 14 pounds? Daniel's jaw tightened. He had their mother's eyes, soft, brown, full of feelings he couldn't control. Right now, those eyes were glassy with shame. "He had a deal," Daniel said. "A real one this time. Import business. Silk from the East. All I had to do was front the money and he took it." "He didn't take it. The shipment was delayed. It's coming. He said. Eleanor pressed her hands to her face. "Marcus Hawley said." The same Marcus Hawley who lost father's last 50 pounds on a horse that didn't finish. The same Marcus who convinced you to invest in a printing press that didn't exist. "This is different." "It's never different, Daniel. It's always the same. He talks, you believe, and I pay for it." They stood there on the pavement while London moved around them, carriages rattling past, a flower seller calling prices, a child chasing a dog through the gutter. Normal life. The kind of life that kept going whether your heart was breaking or not. "He says he can fix it," Daniel said quietly. "Of course he does." "No, listen to me. He has a job. 1 evening's work. For you." Eleanor stared at him. "For me." "A client needs someone, a woman, to attend an art exhibition tonight. Some charity thing at the Pemberton Gallery. Fancy people, fancy food. All you have to do is show up, stand in the right spot, look pretty, and leave. That's it." "That's it. Marcus will provide the dress, the gloves, everything. You go, you stand there for a few hours, and he wipes the debt. All 14 pounds. Gone. Eleanor wanted to scream. She wanted to grab Daniel by his stupid, hopeful face and shake him until the naivete fell out. But she also wanted to eat dinner tonight. She wanted to buy her father's medicine without choosing between that and bread. She wanted, just once, to not lie awake, calculating which bills could wait and which could not. "Why me?" she asked. "Marcus says the client needs someone who looks respectable, well-spoken, not a barmaid or a shop girl. Someone who could pass." "Pass as what?" Daniel hesitated. "As one of them." Eleanor laughed. It came out sharp and humorless. "I'm a seamstress, Daniel. I stitch buttons for women who spend more on gloves than I make in a month." "But you don't look like a seamstress. You don't sound like one either. Mama made sure of that." He paused. "You know she did." He was right. Their mother, God rest her, had spent years teaching Eleanor and Daniel how to speak properly, how to hold themselves, how to exist in rooms above their station. She'd been a governess before she married their father, a merchant who'd built a modest trade business from nothing and lost it to one dishonest partner. Eleanor had inherited her mother's voice, her posture, her quiet dignity. She'd also inherited her father's stubbornness, which was why she stood on this pavement, arms crossed, refusing to agree to something she already knew she'd do. "One evening," she said. "One evening." "And the debt is gone." "Every penny." "And if something goes wrong?" "Nothing will go wrong. Marcus gave his word." "Marcus's word is worth less than the paper he doesn't bother writing it on." But she went home. She told her father she was working late, a lie that sat in her throat like a stone. She found the dress Marcus had sent over. Deep green silk, finer than anything she'd ever touched, with matching gloves and a small beaded purse. There were pearl earrings in a velvet box. Borrowed, obviously. Everything about tonight was borrowed. She dressed in the tiny room she shared with no one since her mother died, and caught her reflection in the cracked mirror on the wall. She looked like someone else. Someone who ate 3 meals a day. Someone who didn't have calluses on her fingers from 12-hour sewing shifts. Someone who belonged in rooms with chandeliers and champagne. The illusion was perfect. And that was exactly what terrified her. Marcus Hawley met her outside the Pemberton Gallery at 7 o'clock. He was all smiles, all charm, all confidence. The same confidence that had bankrupted her family twice over. "Eleanor, you look stunning, absolutely perfect." "Don't," she said. "Just tell me what I need to do." "Simple. Go inside, find box 12 on the second floor. It's a private viewing alcove overlooking the main gallery. Sit down. Watch the exhibition. Don't talk to anyone. Don't draw attention. The client will join you shortly." "Who is the client?" "A gentleman who needs a companion for the evening, purely for appearances." "That tells me nothing." "It tells you everything you need to know." Marcus straightened his cravat. "Look, the man's been hounded by every ambitious mother in London, trying to marry off their daughters. He just needs someone in the seat next to him, so people stop bothering him. Your furniture, Eleanor. Beautiful furniture, but furniture." "You're a terrible human being, Marcus." "Frequently. Now go. Second floor, box 12. I'll be downstairs if you need me." He wouldn't be. She already knew that. Marcus Hawley had never been where he said he'd be. Not once in the 3 years he'd been ruining her brother's life. But she went inside. The Pemberton Gallery was overwhelming. She'd walked past it 100 times, never imagining she'd enter through the front door. The rooms blazed with light. Paintings hung on every wall, massive oils of battles and landscapes, and pale women reclining on sofas. The crowd was everything she was not: wealthy, confident, draped in silk and diamonds and the casual arrogance of people who'd never worried about the price of bread. She found the stairs, found the second floor, found box 12, a small private alcove with 4 velvet chairs, separated from the main gallery by a low partition and heavy curtains. It was empty. She sat down. She waited. The client didn't come. 1 hour passed. The exhibition below buzzed with conversation and laughter. Waiters circulated with champagne. A string quartet played something elegant and forgettable. Eleanor sat alone in box 12 and felt the exhaustion of the day, the hunger, the worry, the 12 hours of sewing settle into her bones like lead. She should leave. She should find Marcus, demand her money, go home. Instead, her eyes grew heavy. The music softened. The voices below blurred into a warm, distant hum. She hadn't slept properly in days, not since Daniel's latest crisis, not since her father's coughing had kept her up past midnight 3 nights running. Her head nodded, caught herself, nodded again. And then she was gone. She didn't know how long she slept. Minutes, maybe an hour. What she knew was the sound, a sharp crack of applause from below, and the sudden, sickening realization that she was leaning against something warm. No, not something, someone. She jerked upright, and her elbow caught a glass of red wine on the arm of the chair next to hers, and it went flying. The wine hit the man beside her square in the chest, splashing across his white evening coat like a wound. "Oh, God!" She was on her feet, mortified, grabbing for a handkerchief she didn't have. "Oh, God, I'm so sorry. I was asleep. I didn't know anyone was—" "Clearly," the man said. He didn't shout. He didn't jump up. He sat there, wine dripping down his coat, and looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. He was younger than she'd expected, 33, maybe 34, with dark hair and blue eyes that held the cold, precise attention of someone accustomed to being in complete control. "I'll pay for the cleaning," she blurted, knowing she couldn't. Knowing 14 pounds of debt meant she couldn't pay for anything. "That won't be necessary." "Please, I'm so embarrassed. I don't—" "How long were you asleep?" The question stopped her. "What?" "How long?" He stood, brushing wine from his coat with a calm that bordered on eerie. "You were here when I arrived 40 minutes ago, already sleeping. I assumed you were waiting for someone." "I was. He didn't come." "Ah." Something shifted in the man's expression. Marcus Holly's arrangement. Eleanor's blood went cold. "You know Marcus?" "I hired Marcus." The words landed like stones in still water. She stared at him, the pieces rearranging themselves with sickening speed. The client, the private box, the evening that was supposed to be simple. "You're the client," she whispered. "I'm the client." He extended his hand. "Adrian Ashford." She didn't take it. "Why wasn't you here? You left me sitting alone for over an hour." "I was delayed by exactly the kind of person I hired you to protect me from." His mouth quirked. Not quite a smile. Ironic, really. "This isn't funny." "No," he agreed. "It's not. But it's about to become very interesting, because you've just solved a problem I've been trying to navigate for weeks." "What are you talking about?" He nodded toward the gallery below. Eleanor followed his gaze and felt her stomach drop. From the boxes across the way, a dozen faces stared back at her. Curious, amused, whispering behind fans and opera glasses. They'd been watching her sleep in a man's private box, watching the wine, watching everything. "They saw," she breathed, "every moment." His voice dropped lower. "The Countess of Davenport has already sent someone to find out who you are. Lady Vivian Hale looks ready to commit murder. And my grandmother, you'll meet her soon enough, We'll have heard about this before we reach the bottom of those stairs. I need to leave. Eleanor turned toward the curtain. His hand caught her arm. Not rough, not forceful, just enough to stop her. If you leave now, he said, you leave as an anonymous scandal. A mystery woman in a duke's private box. They'll fill in the blanks with whatever story suits them. And trust me, their stories will be far worse than the truth. She pulled her arm free. Then what do you suggest? Stay. Let me introduce you. Give them a name and a reason, and the scandal becomes a story. Stories can be controlled. You want me to walk down there, covered in wine, and pretend I belong? The wine is on me, not you. He removed his stained coat, folded it over his arm. Underneath, his waistcoat and shirt were immaculate. And you don't need to pretend anything. You need to let me introduce you as a friend of my sister's. That's all. I don't know your sister. You will by morning. Eleanor's mind raced. Every instinct screamed, run. But running meant going home to Daniel, to the debt, to Mrs. Calloway's back room and pearl buttons and hunger. Running meant Marcus Holly would keep the 14 pounds and her pride. One introduction, she said. Then I leave. Agreed. He offered his arm. She took it because she had no other choice. Because sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is walk forward when everything inside her says flee. They descended the stairs together. The whispers started before they reached the bottom. A woman in pale rose silk intercepted them immediately. Blonde, beautiful, with a smile that could cut glass. Lord Ashford, she said, her eyes locked on Eleanor with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey. I didn't realize you'd brought a guest. How unexpected. Lady Vivian. Adrian's voice was pleasant and absolutely immovable. May I introduce Miss Eleanor Winters, a dear friend of my sister Charlotte's. She's visiting London for the season. Lady Vivian's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went cold. How charming, she said. I don't believe I know the Winters family. You wouldn't, Eleanor said, before she could stop herself. We're terribly unfashionable. Silence. Then Adrian made a sound, barely audible, quickly suppressed, that might have been a laugh. Lady Vivian's eyes narrowed. Well, I'm sure we'll become better acquainted, Miss Winters. I do so look forward to it. She glided away, trailing fury like perfume. That, Adrian murmured, guiding Eleanor toward the door, was either very brave or very foolish. Probably both. Probably. He helped her into a waiting carriage, his carriage, black and gleaming, with a crest on the door she didn't recognize. I need to explain something before we arrive at Ashford House. Arrive at what? My home, where you'll be staying, as my sister's guest. I am absolutely not Miss Winters. He leaned forward, and in the lamplight his face was serious in a way that stopped her protest cold. Marcus Holly is gone. He disappeared an hour into the exhibition. Your brother's debt is still outstanding, and you've just been publicly linked to me in front of the most dangerous gossips in London. If you go home now, Lady Vivian will find out who you are by morning. She'll destroy you for sport. Why would she care about me? Because my grandmother has spent 6 months trying to arrange my marriage to her. Because she believes we have an understanding. Because you just stood in my private box, and every person in that gallery now believes you're the woman I've chosen instead. The carriage swayed through dark streets. Eleanor pressed her hands together to stop them from shaking. I didn't choose anything, she said. I fell asleep. And yet here we are. You planned this. Not the wine, maybe, but the rest. You wanted someone in that box to create exactly this situation. Adrian didn't deny it. I needed an alternative. Someone my grandmother couldn't dismiss immediately. Someone intelligent enough to navigate the consequences. And Marcus found me. Marcus found you. Eleanor looked out the window at London sliding past. The gaslights, the carriages, the grand houses of people whose problems were so different from hers they might as well live on another planet. What exactly are you asking me to do? Pretend, for the rest of the season. Attend events as my sister's companion. Allow the assumption that I'm courting you. When the season ends, we part ways. You'll have references, connections, and enough social capital to secure any position you want. And what do you get? Freedom. From my grandmother's matchmaking. From Lady Vivian. From the suffocating expectation that I marry immediately, produce heirs, and perform the role society has written for me since birth. His voice on that last word, birth, carried a weight she recognized. The weight of a life not chosen, a life inherited, a life that fit like a coat sewn for someone else. She understood that weight. She carried her own version of it every day. I have conditions, she said. His eyebrow rose. You're negotiating with me. You need me just as much as I need this. That makes us equals, Lord Ashford. At least in this. Something changed in his expression. Not softness. He didn't seem capable of that. But attention. Real attention. The kind that said he was seeing her clearly for the first time. Name your conditions, Miss Winters. And in a dark carriage, rolling through London, a seamstress with blood on her thumb and wine on her conscience began to negotiate with an earl who had everything except the one thing money couldn't buy: the freedom to choose his own life. Neither of them knew it yet, but the terms they agreed to that night would break both their hearts before they were done. Eleanor's 3 conditions were simple. First, a letter to her father explaining she'd accepted a respectable position as Lady Charlotte Ashford's companion for the London season. No mention of schemes or debts or fake courtships. Just a clean, believable reason for her absence. Second, when the arrangement ended, she wanted real references. Letters of introduction from Charlotte, from anyone in the Ashford circle willing to vouch for her. Something that could open doors to a governess position or a proper companion role. Something permanent. Third, and this was the one that made Adrian pause, the moment he decided to actually marry someone, whether it was Lady Vivian or anyone else, the charade ended immediately. No overlap. No using her as a shield while pursuing someone real on the side. I may be poor, she told him in that dark carriage, but I won't be made a fool. Not by you. Not by anyone. Adrian had studied her for a long moment. Then he'd extended his hand and said, "Done. All 3. That was last night. Now it was morning, and Eleanor was standing in the middle of a guest bedroom larger than her entire house, wearing a borrowed nightgown, staring at a ceiling painted with angels, wondering if she'd lost her mind. A knock at the door made her jump. "Miss Winters, I'm Alice. His lordship assigned me as your lady's maid." The girl who entered was young, red-haired, bright-eyed, carrying a tray of tea and toast and something that smelled like heaven. "I thought you might be hungry," Alice said shyly. "You didn't eat last night." Eleanor's throat tightened. She couldn't remember the last time someone had thought about whether she'd eaten. "Thank you, Alice. That's very kind." She ate everything on the tray, every crumb. Then she felt ashamed of her hunger, which made her angry, which made her straighten her spine and decide that if she was going to do this, she was going to do it without apology. Alice helped her dress in a morning gown of soft yellow muslin that had appeared from nowhere. "Lady Charlotte sent it up first thing," Alice explained. "She said you'd need something proper while your wardrobe's being arranged." "My wardrobe?" "Oh, yes, miss. Lady Charlotte's already sent word to Madame Laurent on Bond Street. You're to have a fitting this afternoon." Eleanor closed her eyes. Less than 12 hours, and already her life was being reorganized by people she hadn't met. She found Charlotte Ashford in the breakfast room, a whirlwind of dark curls and relentless enthusiasm. She was 19, maybe 20, with her brother's coloring but none of his restraint. Where Adrian was ice, Charlotte was fire. "There you are!" Charlotte leaped from her chair and seized Eleanor's hands. "I've been dying to meet you properly. Last night was such chaos. Sit down, eat something. Have you eaten? Alice was supposed to bring you breakfast." "She did. I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're terrified. I can see it in your eyes." Charlotte pushed a plate of pastries toward her. "But that's perfectly normal. I'd be terrified too if my brother had dragged me into one of his schemes." "He didn't drag me. I agreed." Even worse. Willing participants suffer more because they can't blame anyone else. Charlotte grinned. "I like you already." Eleanor couldn't help it. She almost smiled. "Your brother said I'd be introduced as your friend, that we met at a lending library in Cheltenham." "Yes, I've memorized the story. We bonded over our shared love of Gothic novels. You recommended The Mysteries of Udolpho. I was enchanted. We've been writing letters ever since." Charlotte waved a hand. Simple, elegant, impossible to disprove. "And your grandmother? Adrian mentioned she'd be difficult." Charlotte's brightness dimmed by a fraction. "Grandmother is not difficult. Grandmother is a siege engine in human form. She's been trying to marry Adrian off since the day our father died, and Lady Vivian Hale is her chosen weapon. Beautiful, wealthy, connected, and about as warm as a January window pane. Your brother doesn't want to marry her. My brother doesn't want to marry anyone. He doesn't want to feel anything. He's been like a walking statue since father died, doing everything right, saying everything right, and meaning absolutely none of it." Charlotte's voice dropped. "He was in Scotland when it happened. A sudden fever. Father was gone in 3 days. Adrian didn't make it home in time." The words settled between them like dust. "He never talks about it," Charlotte continued. "Never cries, never breaks. Just works and works and works, until he falls asleep at his desk, and then wakes up and does it again. Grandmother thinks a wife will fix him. I think he needs something else entirely." "What?" "Someone who won't let him hide." Before Eleanor could respond, a voice cut through the room like a blade through silk. "So this is the girl." The Dowager Countess of Thornfield stood in the doorway. She was tall, silver-haired, ramrod straight, dressed in black that looked more like armor than mourning. Her blue eyes, Adrian's eyes but colder, sharper, swept over Eleanor with the precision of a jeweler appraising a stone. "Grandmother," Charlotte started, "this is—" "I know who she is. Marcus Hawley was in my parlor at 7 this morning, confessing everything in exchange for not being thrown into the street." The dowager entered the room and sat down as if she were ascending a throne. "Leave us, Charlotte." "Grandmother." "Now." Charlotte gave Eleanor a look that was half apology, half encouragement, and left. The door clicked shut. Silence filled the room like water filling a bowl. "Sit," the dowager said. Eleanor sat. "Tell me who you really are. Not the lending library nonsense. The truth." Eleanor's hands wanted to shake. She wouldn't let them. "My name is Eleanor Winters. My father was a merchant, textiles mostly, until his business partner embezzled everything and disappeared. That was 6 years ago. Since then, my mother passed, my father's health has declined, and my brother has accumulated debts with men like Marcus Hawley, who promise the world and deliver nothing. I work as a seamstress on Brewer Street. I make 8 shillings a week. I came to the exhibition last night because Marcus told my brother it would clear 14 pounds of debt." She paused, took a breath. "I didn't plan to fall asleep. I didn't plan to spill wine on your grandson. I didn't plan any of this. But I'm here now, and I've agreed to your grandson's arrangement, and I intend to honor it." The dowager watched her through the entire speech without blinking. "You're poor," she said flatly. "Yes." "No connections, no fortune, no prospects beyond whatever pittance you earn with a needle." "Also, yes. And my grandson offered you a fantasy, a few months of luxury in exchange for play acting as his romantic interest." "That's an accurate summary, Your Grace." The dowager leaned forward. Her eyes were terrifying. Not cruel, exactly, but absolutely merciless. "Let me tell you what will happen, Miss Winters. You'll spend weeks at balls and dinners wearing beautiful dresses. My grandson will be attentive in public and absent in private, because that is who he is. Controlled, careful, emotionally unavailable." She paused, letting the words land. "And slowly, without meaning to, you'll begin to believe the fantasy. You'll start to hope that perhaps it could be real." "I won't," Eleanor said. "I know the difference between performance and reality. Everyone thinks they know that difference, until the performance gets good enough." The dowager stood and moved to the window. Her back was rigid, but her knuckles were white where they gripped the windowsill. "My concern is not for you, girl. You're clever and adaptable. Charlotte will see that you land on your feet. My concern is for Sebastian." Eleanor blinked. "Sebastian?" "Adrian Sebastian Ashford. His family calls him by his middle name on occasion. I call him whatever I please." The dowager didn't turn around. "My son died 6 months ago. Your generation would say, Adrian has been handling it well. He hasn't been handling it at all. He's been performing, going through the motions, present in body, but absent in every way that matters." Her voice held no tremor, but Eleanor heard the grief underneath, deep and old and carefully controlled. "Like grandson, like grandmother. I want him to marry," the dowager continued, "not because of duty, though duty matters. Not because of heirs, though heirs matter too. I want him to marry because I want him to live again, to feel something beyond obligation and sorrow." She turned, and for the first time, Eleanor saw something vulnerable in that iron face. "Lady Vivian is suitable, but she's shallow and self-interested. She'd bore him within a month. I pushed the match because he won't choose for himself. He'll bury himself in ledgers and estate work until he's 40 and alone, and wondering why life feels empty." "Then why tell me this?" Eleanor asked. "Why not just send me away?" "Because you're an unknown variable. You might bore him as thoroughly as Vivian would. Or you might surprise me." The dowager's gaze hardened again. "But hear me clearly, Miss Winters. If you hurt him, if you manipulate him or exploit his grief, I will end you. I don't care how sympathetic your circumstances are. Do we understand each other?" "Perfectly, Your Grace." "Good." The dowager swept toward the door, then stopped. "One more thing. The yellow muslin does nothing for your complexion. Tell Charlotte to choose better." And she was gone. Eleanor sat alone, her heart hammering, replaying every word. The dowager had given her a warning and a window, a glimpse into Adrian Ashford that he would never have shown her himself. He was grieving. He was drowning. And everyone around him was either too polite or too afraid to say it out loud. Charlotte burst back in 30 seconds later. "She likes you." "She threatened to destroy me." "Exactly. She only threatens people she respects. If she didn't care, she'd have just had you removed." Charlotte grabbed her arm. "Come on. Madame Laurent is expecting us at noon, and we have your entire season to plan." The fitting was overwhelming. Madame Laurent circled Eleanor with pins and measuring tape, calling out fabrics and styles, while Charlotte approved everything with the enthusiasm of a child in a sweet shop. The emerald silk for evening, the cream with gold embroidery for the Sinclair ball, the blue for the Hartford musical. Oh, and she'll need morning dresses, afternoon dresses, walking dresses. "This is too much," Eleanor protested. "Nonsense. You're my dear friend visiting for the season. Only the best." Eleanor caught Madame Laurent's knowing look and felt her face burn. They all knew, didn't they? The dressmaker, the maid, probably every servant in Ashford House. They all knew this was a performance. But nobody said it. That was how the wealthy operated. Everyone pretending the fiction was real until it became easier than the truth. They returned to Ashford House in the late afternoon. Eleanor wanted nothing more than to collapse in her borrowed room and sleep, but she found Adrian waiting in the library. "Miss Winters, may I have a word?" Charlotte vanished with suspicious speed. The library was Adrian's territory. She could feel it. The room held the particular energy of a space where someone spent most of their time. Books everywhere, papers stacked with military precision, a fire burning low. "I wanted to thank you," Adrian said, standing with his back to the hearth, "for handling my grandmother with grace this morning. I understand she was direct. She threatened to destroy me if I hurt you." His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "That sounds like her. She loves you very much." "She loved my father more. I'm simply the remaining heir." He said it without bitterness, the way someone states the weather. But Eleanor heard what was underneath, the loneliness of being the one who was left, the one who had to carry everything forward. She moved toward the bookshelves, let her fingers trail along the spines. "How did he die, your father?" "A fever, very sudden. He'd never been particularly strong, but we thought—" Adrian stopped. His jaw tightened. "We thought he had years left." "I'm sorry." "Are you? Or is that simply what one says?" The sharpness of it should have stung. Instead, Eleanor turned to face him and said, "My father lost everything he'd built in 30 years because of one dishonest man. He came home and told us we'd have to sell the house, release the servants, start over with nothing. He stood in our parlor and apologized for failing us. And I watched something break inside him that's never healed. So yes, Lord Ashford, I understand loss. And I'm sorry for yours." The silence changed. It lost its edge, became something quieter. "I didn't mean to snap," Adrian said after a long moment. "Yes, you did. But I understand." She turned back to the books. He watched her for a while. She could feel it. Then crossed to stand beside her. He pulled down a volume bound in green leather. My father's favorite, Keats. He used to read it aloud in this room, to no one in particular, just to hear the words. Eleanor took the book carefully. The pages were soft with use, notes written in the margins in a precise hand. She could almost see the man, sitting in one of these leather chairs, reading poetry to an empty room, finding comfort in words when the world outside was too much. "You can borrow it," Adrian said. "Any of them. Charlotte doesn't read, and grandmother prefers scripture. The books are mostly lonely these days." It was the kindest thing he'd said to her. Kinder than the arrangement. Kinder than the conditions. Kinder than any of the practical transactions they'd negotiated. This was personal. This was him showing her something true. "Thank you," she said. "I'd like that." They stood there for a moment in the late afternoon light, not comfortable and not uncomfortable, occupying some unnamed space between strangers and something else. "The Sinclair ball is next week," Adrian said, breaking whatever the moment was. "We should discuss expectations. You'll be introduced as Charlotte's guest. I'll ask you to dance the first waltz and the supper dance. We'll be seen in conversation throughout the evening. Enough to suggest interest, not so much as to be improper." "And Lady Vivian?" His hand tightened on the bookshelf. "She'll be there. My grandmother will see to that. You'll face questions, possibly rudeness." "I can handle rudeness, Lord Ashford. Can you?" He looked at her sharply. "You hired me to be your shield," she continued. "That requires me to stand in front of whatever's coming. I need to know you'll stand beside me, not behind me." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded, slowly, as if agreeing to something larger than either of them had named. "The cream gown with gold embroidery," he said. "Madame Laurent recommended it for the ball." "She did." "She has excellent taste." He returned to his desk, pulled a ledger toward him. The conversation was over. Eleanor left the library with the Keats tucked against her chest and a strange ache behind her ribs that she refused to examine. In the hallway, she passed a portrait of a man who looked like Adrian. Same dark hair, same blue eyes, but with warmth where Adrian had frost. His father. The man who read poetry to empty rooms. The man Adrian hadn't reached in time. She climbed the stairs to her borrowed room, sat on her borrowed bed, and opened the Keats to a random page. In the margin, in that careful handwriting, someone had underlined a single phrase and written beside it, "This is what it feels like to be alive." Eleanor closed the book, pressed it to her chest, and reminded herself, firmly and deliberately, that none of this was real. The dress was borrowed. The room was borrowed. The life was borrowed. And the ache in her chest? That was borrowed too. It had to be. The cream gown fit like it had been made for someone Eleanor was pretending to be. Alice laced the back with careful fingers, while Eleanor stood still and tried to breathe. The gold embroidery caught the candlelight. The borrowed pearls, real ones this time, sent down from Charlotte's own collection, sat cool against her throat. "You look beautiful, miss," Alice said softly. Eleanor stared at her reflection and saw a stranger. A woman who ate 3 meals a day. A woman whose hands weren't rough from needlework. A woman who belonged in cream silk and gold thread and pearls that cost more than her father earned in a year when he still had a business to earn from. "Miss Winters?" Charlotte appeared in the doorway, radiant in pale blue, practically vibrating with excitement. Oh, Eleanor, Adrian is going to forget how to speak." "Adrian is going to perform his role, as will I." "You're no fun at all." Charlotte grabbed her hand. "Come on, he's waiting." Adrian was in the entrance hall in formal evening wear. He looked up when Eleanor appeared at the top of the stairs, and for one unguarded second, just one, something moved across his face. Something raw and honest and almost frightened. Then the mask came back. "The gown is well chosen," he said. "You'll do credit to the family." Charlotte kicked his ankle. "Ow! What I meant to say is, you look appropriate," Eleanor finished for him. "Thank you, Lord Ashford. Shall we go?" The dowager descended last. She examined Eleanor with one sweeping look and said, "Acceptable," which Charlotte later whispered was the equivalent of a standing ovation. The Sinclair house blazed with light and noise and the particular energy of people who lived to be seen. Eleanor felt her courage falter the moment they stepped through the doors. Hundreds of faces, hundreds of eyes, all waiting to judge, to gossip, to decide whether she was worth their attention or their contempt. Steady, Adrian murmured. His hand found the small of her back. Warm, firm, proprietary. You belong here tonight. She didn't. But she lifted her chin and walked forward as if she did. Because that was the deal. That was what she'd agreed to. And Eleanor Winters kept her agreements, even the terrifying ones. Introductions blurred together. Charlotte stayed close, whispering names and warnings. That's the Marchioness of Pemberton. Terrifying but honest. Those are the Whitfield sisters. Harmless gossips. Avoid Lord Barton. He corners women near the punch bowl and talks about his hunting dogs for hours. And then, like a storm cloud drifting into a clear sky, Lady Vivian appeared. She was devastating. Blonde curls gleaming, rose silk cut to perfection, moving through the crowd with the absolute confidence of a woman who had never once questioned her place in the world. She stopped directly in front of Eleanor and smiled the way a cat smiles at a mouse it hasn't decided to kill yet. "Miss Winters, how lovely to see you again. That gown is quite something. Madame Laurent's work, if I'm not mistaken." "You have a good eye, Lady Vivian." "I should. I've been patronizing Madame Laurent since before she was fashionable." The smile sharpened. "Tell me, where did you say your family's estate was? I don't believe I caught it last time." "I didn't say. My family keeps a modest home in the north. Nothing grand." "How charming. Modesty is so refreshing in a season full of people desperate to impress." Vivian turned to Adrian, dismissing Eleanor entirely. "I hope you'll save me a dance, Lord Ashford, for old time's sake." "I'm afraid my card is rather full this evening," Adrian said. The lie was smooth. The ball had barely begun, but he delivered it with such quiet authority that Vivian's smile froze on her face like cracked ice. "Of course," she said. "Perhaps later." She glided away. Eleanor released a breath she'd been holding since Vivian first opened her mouth. "Well done," Adrian said. "You didn't flinch." "Should I have?" "Most people do. She has that effect." The orchestra began a waltz. Adrian turned to her and extended his hand. "I believe this is ours." She'd practiced. 5 days of that terrifying French instructor shouting about feeling the music. 5 days of counting steps until her feet ached. But this was different. This was real. Adrian's hand at her waist, her palm against his. The weight of hundreds of watching eyes pressing down on them like a physical force. "You're counting," he said as they began to move. The instructor said, "Forget the instructor, just follow me." She tried. Let go of the numbers, the steps, the fear. Trusted his lead. And something shifted. Their movements found each other, fell into rhythm, became something that felt less like a performance and more like a conversation their bodies were having without permission. She caught Charlotte beaming from the edge of the dance floor. Caught the Dowager watching with narrow, calculating eyes. Caught Vivian standing rigid with a champagne glass she was gripping hard enough to break. "Everyone is staring," Eleanor whispered. "Let them." His hand tightened at her waist. Not much, just enough for her to feel it, to understand that whatever was happening between them on this dance floor had stopped being entirely for show. The waltz ended. He released her with careful precision, bowing over her hand. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Winters." "The pleasure was mine, Lord Ashford." They were performing, so why did her hand still feel warm where he'd held it? The evening continued in a whirl of dances and introductions and champagne Eleanor barely sipped because she needed every bit of clarity she possessed. Young lords asked her to dance. Charlotte's friends asked friendly questions about Cheltenham. The Dowager held court and watched everything. And Adrian stayed near. Never obviously, never improperly, but always there, a constant presence at the edge of her awareness. When Lord Barton approached, reeking of tobacco and launching into a monologue about his hounds, Adrian materialized with a smooth excuse about needing Eleanor for an introduction. "Thank you," she murmured as he guided her away. "Barton's harmless but relentless. 20 minutes of hound genealogy isn't how I'd choose to spend an evening." "How would you choose to spend an evening?" He looked at her. "Quietly, with good books and better conversation." "That's lonely." "Is it? Or is it selective?" During the supper dance, something loosened between them. The formality softened. They talked, really talked, about books, about his father's collection, about poets and poetry, and the difference between reading to learn and reading to survive. "Byron or Keats?" he asked. "Both, but for different reasons. Keats when I need beauty, Byron when I need fire. And tonight, which mood?" she considered. "Tonight I feel like I'm living in someone else's story." His expression shifted, grew serious. "Does that bother you?" "I'm not sure yet." The supper dance ended, but neither of them moved to separate. The dowager appeared with Vivian in tow, her expression brooking no argument. "Adrian, you must dance with Lady Vivian. It would be unconscionably rude to ignore her entirely." Eleanor stepped back to release him to his obligation. His hand caught hers. "My card is full, grandmother." "Surely you can make room." "I cannot." His voice was pleasant and absolutely final. "If you'll excuse us, I promise to show Miss Winters the conservatory." He led Eleanor through a set of glass doors before either woman could respond. The night air hit her flushed skin, and she gasped with relief. Music drifted from inside, muted and strange, like a memory of a song rather than the song itself. "I apologize," Adrian said, releasing her hand. "That was presumptuous. You don't actually need to show me any conservatory." "No, but I'm grateful for the escape." He moved to the railing and stood there, hands gripping the stone, looking out at nothing. "My grandmother won't stop. She believes she knows what's best for everyone. Individual happiness is a luxury she doesn't believe in." "Do you believe in it?" He was quiet for a long time. "I used to think duty was enough. If I managed the estates well, attended Parliament, married appropriately, that would constitute a life. My father thought differently." "He married for love?" "Against my grandmother's wishes. My mother had no fortune, no title, no great connections. But he chose her anyway." Adrian's voice dropped. "They were happy, truly happy. And then she died giving birth to Charlotte. And he spent 20 years alone. Never remarried. Grandmother thought it was a waste. All those years of grief when he could have made another alliance, strengthened the family's position. But he didn't. He said some things can't be replaced. Some losses leave marks that don't heal." Adrian's hands tightened on the railing. "And then he died, and left me with all his responsibilities and none of his courage." "You're angry." "I'm angry at death." The words came out raw. "For taking my mother before I could know her. For taking my father before I could—" He stopped, his jaw locked. "This is inappropriate conversation for a ball." "We're alone. You're allowed to be inappropriate." "Am I?" His laugh was bitter and brief. "I'm the Earl of Thornfield. I'm never allowed to be anything but appropriate." "That sounds exhausting." "It is." Silence wrapped around them. Eleanor knew she should go back inside. Knew this was too intimate, too honest, too far beyond the boundaries of their arrangement. But she couldn't make herself move, and neither, it seemed, could he. "Thank you," Adrian said finally, "for tonight, for playing your role so well." "It's been easier than I expected." "Easier to lie, you mean?" "Easier to breathe." He turned, looked at her, and the expression on his face, unguarded, open, almost desperate, made her chest constrict. "You make it easier to breathe," he said. "I didn't expect that. I didn't want it. Adrian, and now I don't know what to do with it." Before she could answer, voices spilled from the doorway. They stepped apart, fast, instinctive, as Vivian emerged with two friends flanking her like lieutenants. "Oh," Vivian said, her eyes cutting between them. "I didn't realize the conservatory was occupied. How fortunate. Your grandmother is asking for you, Lord Ashford." It was a lie. Eleanor could see it. But Adrian couldn't refuse without being openly rude. And rudeness was the one weapon an earl could not use. "Of course." He bowed to Eleanor. "Miss Winters, thank you for the evening air." He left. And Eleanor stood alone with three women who looked at her the way wolves look at a lamb separated from the flock. "You're very bold," the brunette in yellow said, "monopolizing Lord Ashford's time so thoroughly." "I wasn't aware conversation constituted a monopoly." "Conversation?" Vivian's smile could have drawn blood. "Is that what you call it? How fascinating. Most young ladies would be more careful about their reputations." "Most young ladies," Eleanor said, letting steel into her voice, "would be more careful about revealing their jealousy quite so obviously." The brunette gasped. Vivian's face flushed crimson. "You forget yourself, Miss Winters. You're a guest here, a temporary guest, while I am a permanent fixture of this world. When the Earl tires of his little charity project, you'll crawl back to whatever gutter you emerged from. I'll still be here." Each word was designed to wound, and each word landed, because Vivian wasn't wrong. This was temporary. Eleanor was temporary, and no amount of cream silk and gold embroidery could change what she was underneath. A seamstress with calloused fingers and 14 pounds of her brother's debt. "Then you have nothing to worry about," Eleanor said quietly. She walked past them toward the door, her head high, her hands trembling at her sides. She found Charlotte near the refreshments and grabbed her arm. "I need to leave. Now." Charlotte took one look at her face and didn't ask questions. They slipped away through a side entrance. In the carriage, Charlotte held her hand and said nothing, which was the kindest thing anyone had done for Eleanor all evening. "She's wrong," Charlotte said finally. "Whatever Vivian said, she's wrong." "Is she?" Eleanor's voice cracked. "I am temporary. Everything about this is borrowed. The dress, the pearls, the life. In a few weeks, it ends, and I go back to being nobody." "You're not nobody. I'm a seamstress, Charlotte, a seamstress who fell asleep and spilled wine and stumbled into something she has no business being part of." Charlotte squeezed her hand, but didn't argue. And Eleanor stared out the window at the dark streets and hated herself for the tears she couldn't stop. She avoided Adrian for 3 days. It wasn't difficult. He seemed to be avoiding her, too. They passed at meals like strangers, exchanged hollow pleasantries, and retreated to opposite ends of the house. The Dowager noticed. Charlotte noticed. Even Alice noticed, though she was too polite to say so. On the third evening, Eleanor went to the library because she needed the Keats. Needed the comfort of someone else's beautiful words to drown out the ugly ones echoing in her head. She didn't expect to find Adrian there, hunched over a desk covered in papers, working by candlelight with the desperate focus of a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. "I can leave," she said from the doorway. "Stay." He didn't look up. "I'm just finishing these accounts." So she sat, opened the Keats, tried to read, failed, kept stealing glances at him instead, the furrow in his brow, the way his pen moved with mechanical precision, the exhaustion carved into every line of his face. "You're staring," he said, without looking up. "I'm observing. Is there a difference? Staring is rude. Observing is educational." That earned her an actual glance. "And what have you learned from your observations?" "That you work too hard. That you carry tension in your shoulders. That you're burying yourself in ledgers to avoid dealing with something you're not ready to face." His pen stopped. "You presume a great deal, Miss Winters. You hired me to be your fake courtship. That requires a certain amount of presumption." For a long, dangerous moment, she thought he'd dismiss her, send her away with the cold finality she'd seen him use on everyone else. Instead, he set down his pen, leaned back, looked at her with those blue eyes that always seemed to be measuring the distance between himself and the rest of the world. "Tell me something real," he said. "Something that has nothing to do with arrangements or performances or borrowed dresses." "Like what?" "Like what you want. Not what you need or what your family needs. What you actually want for yourself." Nobody had ever asked her that. Not once. Her entire life had been organized around necessities. What the family could afford, what they couldn't, what had to be sacrificed so something else could survive. "I want to not be afraid anymore," she said slowly. "Of poverty, of losing what little we have, of watching my father disappear into himself a little more each day." She paused. "I want to choose, just once. I want to make a decision because I want to, not because I have to." Adrian watched her. Something in his face was changing. The ice cracking, the mask slipping. And for once, he didn't seem to be fighting it. "That's why you agreed to this," he said. "Not for the dresses or the balls. For a chance." "Yes. And when it ends? When you go back? Then I'll have references, connections, skills. I'll land on my feet." She met his eyes. "Your grandmother said I would, and I intend to prove her right." He stood, crossed the room to where she sat, took the Keats gently from her hands and set it aside. "What if I don't want it to end?" The words hit her like a physical blow. "Don't, Eleanor. Don't say things you don't mean because it's late and you're tired and I happen to be the only person in this house who talks to you like a human being instead of a title. That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" He cupped her face in his hands. His touch was gentle, almost tentative, as if he was afraid she'd shatter. Or he would. "It's the first real thing I've felt since my father died," he said. "You're the only person who doesn't let me hide. You push back. You tell me the truth. You sit in my library and observe my tension and refuse to pretend everything is fine when it obviously isn't." "Adrian, I feel alive when you're here. I feel like I've been underwater for 6 months, and you're the first breath of air." She should have pulled away. Should have reminded him of the arrangement, the conditions, the impossibility of what he was suggesting. Instead, she heard herself whisper, "I'm scared." "So am I." He kissed her, not for show, not for the watching eyes of society or the strategic benefit of their arrangement. He kissed her because he meant it, slow and desperate and achingly honest. And she kissed him back because she meant it too, because her body had known before her mind caught up. Because some truths don't need permission to exist. When they broke apart, breathing hard, reality flooded back like cold water. "We need to talk," he said. "Really talk. About what this is." "Adrian, we can't just—" "Tomorrow. Come to the library after breakfast. We'll figure this out." Tomorrow never came, because at breakfast, the Dowager detonated a bomb. "Adrian!" Her voice cut through the morning like a church bell. "I've arranged a dinner for tomorrow evening. family and close friends. Lady Vivian and her mother will attend. It's time you formalized your intentions regarding marriage." Adrian's cup hit his saucer with a crack. "I beg your pardon?" "You've been distracted this season, but we must be practical. Lady Vivian remains the most suitable option, and her family expects clarity." "I have made no promises to Lady Vivian." "You've given her reason to hope. The decent thing would be to formalize the courtship or release her properly." "Then I'm releasing her. I have no intention of marrying Lady Vivian." "Because of Miss Winters?" The dowager's voice could have frozen fire. "Because of a seamstress you've known for 3 weeks?" Charlotte made a small, frightened sound. Eleanor sat perfectly still, her toast turning to ash in her mouth. "Because I don't love her," Adrian said. "I don't even like her. She's everything you want, suitable, connected, appropriate, and she makes me feel absolutely nothing. Love is a luxury. Duty is what endures. Father didn't think so. And look where it left him." The dowager's composure cracked for the first time. "Alone for 20 years, grieving until the day he died. Is that what you want? Maybe grief is better than numbness." Adrian stood and walked out. The door closed behind him. The silence he left was devastating. The dowager turned to Eleanor. Her eyes were not cold anymore. They were burning. "This is your doing." "I didn't ask for his feelings, Your Grace." "Didn't you? A sympathetic ear, a pretty face, playing the role of someone different from every empty-headed girl chasing his title. How convenient that you appeared at his most vulnerable moment." "Grandmother, that's not fair," Charlotte started. "Be quiet, Charlotte." The dowager didn't look away from Eleanor. "You're a seamstress, playing dress-up in clothes you can't afford, in a house you don't belong in, chasing a man so far above your station you'd need a telescope to see him. What do you think happens if he actually marries you? How long before he resents the sacrifice? Before society crushes you and he realizes what he's thrown away for a few weeks of infatuation?" Every word was a knife, and every knife found its target, because every word was something Eleanor had already told herself in the dark hours of the night, when the borrowed bed felt too soft and the borrowed life felt too good to last. "You're right," Eleanor said. Her voice was quiet and absolutely steady, and it cost her everything she had. "I don't belong here. I never did." She stood. She left the room. She climbed the stairs to the green guest suite, and she began to pack. Alice found her 20 minutes later, folding the yellow muslin with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "Miss, what are you doing?" "Leaving." "But does his lordship know?" "His lordship doesn't need to know. This arrangement was always temporary. I'm simply ending it ahead of schedule." She left the dresses, all of them, except the green silk from the Hartford musical that she couldn't bring herself to surrender. She left the pearls, the gloves, the accessories. She kept only 2 things, the Keats that Adrian had given her, and the memory of his kiss, which she couldn't leave behind no matter how hard she tried. She wrote 2 letters, one to Charlotte thanking her for everything, one to Adrian. The second letter took 6 attempts. What do you write to a man you almost let yourself love? "Lord Ashford, I'm returning home. This arrangement has run its course, and I think we both know it's best to end it before anyone gets hurt beyond repair. Thank you for your kindness and your library, and for making me feel, even briefly, like I belong somewhere. Please don't try to find me. Let this be a clean break. Yours in gratitude, Eleanor Winters." She sealed both letters and left them on the writing desk. At noon, the carriage she'd requested pulled away from Ashford House. Eleanor didn't look back. Looking back would mean seeing the library windows, and seeing the library windows would mean thinking about Adrian reading poetry in his father's chair, and thinking about Adrian would mean falling apart. She couldn't afford to fall apart. She'd never been able to afford it. That was the whole problem with being poor. You didn't even get the luxury of breaking down, because breaking down cost time, and time cost money, and money was the one thing she'd never had enough of. So she sat straight-backed in the carriage as London slid past the windows, and she pressed the Keats against her chest like a bandage over a wound. And she told herself this was the right decision. She told herself that all the way home, and not once, not for a single mile, did she believe it. Home smelled like bread and laundry soap, and the particular kind of quiet that settles over a house where hope left a long time ago. Eleanor stood in the doorway of the parlor with her small case at her feet and watched her father look up from his chair by the window. He didn't seem surprised. That was the worst part. He looked at her the way you look at rain when you knew the clouds were coming. "Back already?" he said. "Yes." "Was it bad?" "No, it was wonderful. That's why I left." Her father nodded slowly, as if this made perfect sense. Maybe it did. He was a man who understood that the best things in life were often the most dangerous, that hope was a knife that cut deepest when you held it closest. "It was always going to end," he said quietly. "Best it ended before you got hurt." But she was already hurt. The wound was just invisible, tucked behind her ribs where no one could see it, pulsing with every heartbeat like a bruise that wouldn't fade. Daniel appeared from the kitchen, guilty and relieved in equal measure. He hugged her too tightly and talked too much and asked too many questions she didn't answer. Was the house big? Were the people terrible? Did the Earl treat her well? Did Charlotte really send all those dresses? Eleanor answered in monosyllables and went upstairs to the room she had grown up in, small, bare, cold, and sat on the narrow bed and tried to feel like she'd made the right choice. She couldn't. 3 days passed. 3 days of mending other people's clothes. 3 days of marketing and calculating and stretching pennies until they screamed. 3 days of pretending she didn't think about Adrian every time she opened the Keats, every time she smelled cedar, every time the afternoon light hit the wall at the angle that reminded her of the library at Ashford House. She was fine. She told herself she was fine. She told her father she was fine. She told Daniel she was fine. She told Mrs. Calloway she was fine when she went back to the shop on the second day and picked up her needle as if the last 3 weeks had been a dream. "You look different," Mrs. Calloway said, studying her over the top of her spectacles. "I'm the same as I ever was." "No, you're not. But you will be, given enough time. That's the tragedy of it." On the third night, Eleanor sat by the kitchen fire, reading the Keats and trying not to cry. She'd reached the page with the marginal note. "This is what it feels like to be alive." And the handwriting blurred because her eyes were full. Eleanor. Her father stood in the kitchen doorway. He was thin these days, thinner than he should be, his lungs rattling with a cough that never quite went away. But his eyes were clear. "Come sit with me," he said. She followed him to the parlor. He eased into his chair, the only good chair left, the one piece of furniture they hadn't sold, and gestured for her to sit across from him. "Tell me about him," he said. "There's nothing to tell." "There's everything to tell. You've barely eaten in 3 days. You haven't slept. You're reading poetry by a dead man and crying into your tea. Tell me about him." So she did. She told her father everything. The gallery, the wine, the arrangement, the conditions, the dowager's threats and Charlotte's warmth, and Adrian's grief that sat on him like a coat made of stone. She told him about the waltz and the library and the kiss, and the dowager's final words that had broken something inside her she didn't know how to fix. Her father listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Your mother," he said finally, "was a governess when I met her. Did you know that?" "You've told me." "I haven't told you all of it." He shifted in his chair, wincing at some pain he never complained about. "Her employer, the family she worked for, they told her she was reaching above her station. They said I was beneath her notice. They said a merchant's life would grind her down, that she'd end up bitter and poor and disappointed." They weren't entirely wrong. No, they weren't. Her father's eyes were bright. "But your mother used to say something I've never forgotten. She said being afraid of the wrong thing is worse than being afraid of nothing at all." She said most people are afraid of getting hurt, when what they should be afraid of is getting to the end and realizing they never tried. Eleanor's throat ached. "She was braver than me." "She was exactly like you, stubborn and scared and convinced she didn't deserve anything good." He reached over and took her hand. His grip was weaker than it used to be. "You left because you were afraid, not of failing, of hoping. Because hoping hurts worse when you're poor. When you've already lost everything once, you don't trust the world to give you anything twice." "He's an earl, Papa. I'm a seamstress." "And I was a merchant who lost everything. Your mother married me anyway. She never regretted it, not once. Not even at the end." "That's different." "How?" Eleanor couldn't answer. On the fourth morning, a carriage pulled up outside the house. Eleanor was in the kitchen, scrubbing dishes, when Daniel burst through the door. "It's Marcus Hawley." "Tell him I'm not home. He says the Earl sent him." Her hands went still in the water. Suds dripped from her fingers. She stared at the plate she was holding and tried to make her heart stop hammering. "Tell him to go away." "Eleanor." "Tell him!" Daniel hesitated. Then he went back to the door. She heard voices. Daniel's reluctant, Marcus's persistent. And then Marcus was in the kitchen, standing there in his ridiculous coat, looking as out of place among the drying herbs and cracked crockery as a peacock in a henhouse. "Miss Winters, you're a remarkably difficult woman to pin down." "I told Daniel to send you away." "He tried. I'm very bad at taking no for an answer." Marcus pulled out a chair and sat down, uninvited. "The Earl sent me." "I gathered that. The answer is no." "You haven't heard the question." "I don't need to. Whatever Lord Ashford wants, the answer is no. I'm done. The arrangement is finished." Marcus leaned back and studied her with an expression she'd never seen on his face before. Something almost like sincerity. "He's cancelled the grandmother's dinner. Told Lady Vivian personally, to her face, that he has no interest in a match. She didn't take it well. There was crying, I believe, and some very expensive porcelain may have been destroyed. That's his business. He's also told his grandmother that he won't be entertaining any marriage proposals this season, or any other season, until he's spoken to you." Eleanor's hands were shaking. She shoved them into the dishwater to hide it. "He'll get over it. Earls always do." "This one won't." Marcus's voice dropped the theatrical quality it usually carried. "I've worked for a lot of wealthy men, Miss Winters. Most of them are exactly what you'd expect. Entitled, bored, using people like furniture. Lord Ashford isn't like that. He's been locked in his study for 4 days. Charlotte says he's barely eating. The servants are terrified. That's not my responsibility." "No, it's not. But he asked me to deliver a message." Marcus reached into his coat and produced a letter. Cream paper, sealed with dark wax. "He said if you read this and still want nothing to do with him, he'll respect that. No more letters, no more messengers, no more Marcus Hawley showing up in your kitchen uninvited." He set the letter on the table. Eleanor stared at it. "I told him not to find me." "He didn't find you. He sent me. There's a distinction. There's not. There really is. It's a legal gray area that I've exploited many times in my career. Marcus stood. Read the letter, Miss Winters. Or don't. But I'll be outside in the carriage for exactly 1 hour. After that, I'm gone, and so is the offer. He left. Eleanor stood at the sink with her hands in cold dishwater and stared at the letter on the table and felt the world split into two futures, one where she opened it and one where she didn't. Her father appeared in the doorway. He looked at the letter, looked at her. "Your mother would have opened it before it hit the table," he said. Then he shuffled back to his chair. Eleanor dried her hands, sat down, broke the seal. The handwriting was precise and careful. The letters formed by someone who wrote ledgers and legal documents, not love letters. But the words were not careful at all. "Eleanor, I'm not going to apologize for what I feel, because apologizing would mean it's wrong, and it isn't. What I said in the library was true. What happened between us was true. You are the first real thing I've encountered in 6 months of performing a life that doesn't feel like mine. My grandmother was cruel to you. I should have been there to stop it. I wasn't, and I'm sorry for that. But she was also wrong. You belong in any room you choose to enter, not because of dresses or titles or the circumstances of your birth, but because of who you are. You are brave and honest, and you don't let me hide from the things I need to face. I've canceled the dinner. I've told Lady Vivian there will be no match. I've told my grandmother that I will marry when and whom I choose, and not before. These decisions are mine, regardless of what you decide. But Eleanor, I want you to choose me. Not because I'm offering you a life of luxury or an escape from difficulty. Because I am difficult. I'm grieving and closed off and terrible at saying what I feel. And I work too much. And I carry tension in my shoulders, and I bury myself in ledgers to avoid the things that hurt. I'm offering you myself, which is a far less impressive gift than a season's wardrobe or a house full of servants. But it's real. It's the most real thing I have. Come back. Not for the arrangement, not for the performance. Come back for the conversation we never finished. Come back because you make it easier to breathe, and I don't want to stop breathing again. If you don't come back, I'll understand. I'll respect your decision. But I need you to know, you were never temporary to me. Not for a single moment. Yours, not in gratitude, but in truth. Adrian. Eleanor read the letter twice. 3 times. Her vision blurred, and the words swam, and she pressed the paper against her chest the same way she'd pressed the Keats, holding it over the wound behind her ribs, as if words on paper could heal what words out loud had broken. Her mother appeared in the kitchen doorway. Not her mother, the memory of her mother. The echo of the woman who'd married a merchant against everyone's advice and never regretted it. Eleanor blinked, and the echo was gone, and it was just the empty doorway and the smell of bread and the ticking of the kitchen clock. She stood up, walked to the front of the house, opened the door. Marcus was leaning against the carriage, examining his fingernails with theatrical boredom. He looked up, saw her face, and smiled. "One conversation," Eleanor said. "That's all." "Of course. 1 conversation. I'll have you there by evening." "I mean it, Marcus. 1 conversation, and then I come home." "Absolutely. Whatever you say. Shall I take your bag?" "I don't have a bag." "Even better. Traveling light. Very dramatic." He opened the carriage door. "After you, Miss Winters." She climbed in. Daniel appeared at the front door, looking hopeful. Her father appeared behind him, looking like a man watching his daughter do something either very brave or very foolish. Eleanor thought of her mother, of the choice she'd made, of the life she'd built with a man everyone said was wrong for her. Being afraid of the wrong thing is worse than being afraid of nothing at all. The carriage lurched forward, London-bound. Eleanor sat with Adrian's letter in her lap and his Keats in her heart, and watched the countryside roll past, and tried to remember how to breathe. Ashford House looked the same. The cream facade, the columns, the windows glowing warm in the evening light. But everything felt different, sharper, more real, stripped of the gauzy unreality of the arrangement. She wasn't coming back as a performer. She was coming back as herself. And that was infinitely more terrifying. Alice nearly collapsed when she saw her. "Miss Winters, oh, miss, he's been impossible, absolutely impossible. Locked in that study, won't eat properly, snapped at the footman yesterday, and then apologized 3 times, which frightened the poor man more than the snapping did." "Where is Charlotte?" "With the Dowager, trying to keep the peace. There's been quite the row, miss, quite the row." Marcus deposited her in the entrance hall and disappeared as if the building might collapse on him if he lingered. Eleanor stood alone, clutching her reticule with both hands, and stared at the hallway that led to the library. Charlotte appeared at the top of the stairs. She took one look at Eleanor and flew down the steps so fast she nearly fell. "You came back!" Charlotte grabbed her and held on tight. "You wonderful, stubborn fool! You came back!" "One conversation, Charlotte. That's all I promised." "One conversation is all it takes when both people finally decide to tell the truth." Charlotte pulled back, her eyes fierce. "He loves you. You know that." "I know it. That's what terrifies me." "Good. Be terrified. Do it anyway." Charlotte turned her toward the hallway. "He's in the library. He's been there for 4 days. I'm fairly certain he's read every book twice." Eleanor walked the hallway alone. Her footsteps echoed on the marble. The house was quiet, the held breath kind of quiet, the kind that comes before a storm breaks or a fever peaks. She reached the library door, knocked once. "I said I'm not hungry, Alice." "It's not Alice." Silence. Then the sound of a chair scraping back. Footsteps. The door opened. Adrian looked terrible. Charlotte hadn't exaggerated. His hair was disordered, his coat missing, his shirt wrinkled, shadows carved deep beneath his eyes. He looked like a man who'd been at war with himself and lost on every front. Eleanor. Her name in his mouth. The way he said it. Not surprised, not relieved, but reverent, as if he'd been saying it to empty rooms for 4 days and couldn't believe the room was finally answering back. "You came." Marcus was very persistent. "I told him to be." Adrian stepped back from the doorway. "Come in, please." She entered the library. Their library. Books everywhere, pulled from shelves, stacked on surfaces, opened and abandoned. He'd been searching for something in these pages. She wondered if he'd found it. "I read your letter," she said. "And?" "And I cried. And then I read it again. And then I was angry with you for making me cry." "That's fair." "None of this is fair, Adrian." She turned to face him. "Your grandmother called me a seamstress playing dress-up. She said you'd resent me. She said society would crush me and you'd realize what you'd thrown away." "My grandmother is afraid. Fear makes people cruel." "She's not wrong, though, about any of it. I am a seamstress. Your world will judge me. People will say terrible things." "People already say terrible things. About me, about my family, about my father's choices. I stopped caring what they said the night you told me I was burying myself in ledgers to avoid grief." He moved toward her. "You were right, by the way. I was hiding. I've been hiding since the day he died, building walls out of duty and paperwork and calling it a life." "And now?" Now I don't want the walls anymore." He stopped an arm's length away, close enough to touch, not touching. "I want the mess. I want the risk. I want to feel things that terrify me, because being terrified means being alive, and you taught me that." "I didn't teach you anything. I spilled wine on your coat. And then you told me the truth when everyone else was telling me what I wanted to hear." His voice cracked. "Eleanor, I'm not asking you to be a duchess or a society wife or anything other than what you are. I'm asking you to stay, because you make me want to be present instead of performing, because my father spent 20 years grieving the woman he loved and never once wished he hadn't loved her, because I found his handwriting in the margins of that quiche you're carrying, and I know he'd tell me to choose you." Eleanor's eyes burned. "What if your grandmother never accepts me?" "Then she doesn't, and we live our lives anyway." "What if society shuts you out?" "Then we find better society." "What if it's hard? What if it's ugly and painful and nothing like the fantasy?" "Then it's real." He reached for her hands. She let him take them. "Real is all I want. Real is the only thing worth having." She looked down at their joined hands, his elegant, hers roughened by years of needlework, and felt the distance between their worlds shrink to nothing. "I love you," she said. "I tried not to. I tried so hard not to. But I do. And it scares me more than poverty ever did, because poverty only takes things. Love takes everything." "Then let it take everything." He pulled her closer. "Let it take all of it. The fear and the doubt and the distance. Let it take whatever it needs to, and trust that what's left will be enough." She looked up at him, saw the grief still there, the loss, the scar that would never fully heal. But behind it, underneath it, she saw something else, something warm and desperate and brave. "One condition," she whispered. He almost laughed. Almost. "You and your conditions." "When we tell your grandmother, I do the talking." "Eleanor." "She needs to hear it from me. Not from you, not from Charlotte, not through a closed door. From me, face to face." Adrian studied her. Then he lifted her hand to his mouth and pressed his lips against her knuckles. A gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "I wouldn't dream of stopping you," he said. The dowager was in her sitting room. Eleanor knew this because Charlotte had stationed herself at the top of the stairs, like a general directing troops. "She's been in there since breakfast. She's embroidering, which means she's furious. She only embroiders when she's too angry to speak. Grandmother's embroidery could survive a war." "Charlotte," Adrian said quietly, "give us a moment." Charlotte looked between them, squeezed Eleanor's hand once, hard, and disappeared down the hallway. Eleanor could hear her footsteps retreating, then stopping. She was almost certainly listening from around the corner. But Eleanor didn't care. She needed every ally she could get. "You don't have to do this tonight," Adrian said. "We could wait. Let her calm down." "Your grandmother doesn't calm down. She reloads." Eleanor straightened the front of her dress. Her own dress, the one she'd traveled in. Plain gray cotton with mended cuffs. Not borrowed silk. Not gold embroidery. Her. "If I face her in a week wearing some new gown, she'll think I've come back for the wardrobe. She needs to see me like this." Adrian looked at her, really looked, and something crossed his face that she'd never seen before. Not admiration exactly. Recognition. The look of someone seeing another person clearly, fully, without illusion. "You're remarkable," he said. "I'm terrified. Those aren't the same thing." "They might be." Eleanor knocked on the sitting room door. Didn't wait for an answer. Walked in. The Dowager Countess of Thornfield sat by the window with an embroidery hoop that she was attacking with the precision of a surgeon. She didn't look up when Eleanor entered. She didn't need to. The slight stiffening of her shoulders said she already knew exactly who was standing in her doorway.
"Your Grace," Eleanor said, "I'd like to speak with you."
"I assumed you'd left." The Dowager's needle moved in sharp, controlled strokes. "I assumed you'd had the good sense to return to your life and leave my grandson to his."
"I did leave. I came back."
"Obviously. Marcus Hawley's carriage is in my courtyard. That man has the subtlety of a brass band." She still hadn't looked up. "Well, sit down. Say whatever you've come to say." Eleanor sat. She folded her hands in her lap. No gloves, no pearls, no borrowed armor. Just her own rough fingers, with the needle prick scars and the callus on her right thumb from 10 years of holding a thimble. "You were right," Eleanor began. That made the Dowager look up. Her eyes narrowed. "About what, specifically? I'm right about a great many things." "About me. About what I am. You called me a seamstress playing dress-up, and that's exactly what I was. Every dress, every pair of gloves, every dance in every ballroom. It was borrowed, a costume. I walked into your grandson's life wearing someone else's clothes and pretending to be someone I'm not." The Dowager set down her embroidery. Her full attention was worse than her anger. "Go on. But you were wrong about one thing. You said I'd start to believe the fantasy, that I'd begin to hope it could be real." Eleanor held the older woman's gaze. "I didn't begin to hope. I fought it every single day. I reminded myself constantly that this was temporary, that I didn't belong, that girls like me don't get fairy tales. I did everything right, Your Grace. I kept my distance. I remembered my place. I prepared myself for the ending. And yet you're here, because the ending came, and it didn't feel like relief. It felt like dying." Eleanor's voice cracked, but she didn't stop. She couldn't afford to stop. "I went home. I picked up my needle. I went back to Mrs. Calloway's shop and stitched buttons onto wedding gowns and told myself I was fine. And every night I opened a book of Keats that your son used to read, and I cried into pages that smelled like this library. And I knew that going back to my life wasn't the brave choice. It was the cowardly one." The Dowager's expression didn't change, but her hands were still. No embroidery, no fidgeting, absolute stillness, which Eleanor was beginning to understand meant she was listening with everything she had. "I'm not here for the dresses," Eleanor continued. "I'm not here for the house, or the title, or the season. I left all of that behind when I packed my bags. I kept 2 things, the Keats and the truth about how I feel about your grandson." "And how do you feel about my grandson?" "I love him. Not the Earl, not the title, not the inheritance. I love the man who reads his father's books at midnight because he misses him too much to sleep. The man who works himself to exhaustion because stopping means feeling, and feeling means grieving, and grieving means admitting that the person he needed most in the world is gone." The Dowager flinched. It was tiny, a contraction of muscles around her eyes, a tightening of her jaw. But Eleanor saw it, and understood suddenly that this woman's armor was no thicker than her own, just more expensive. "He told me his father married for love," Eleanor said, "against your wishes. He said you thought it was a waste, all those years of grief after she died." "It was a waste." The Dowager's voice was hoarse. 20 years. He had 20 years to rebuild, to find companionship, to live. Instead, he sat in this library and read poetry to an empty room and waited to die. But was he happy? Before she died, was he happy? The Dowager didn't answer. She turned to the window. Her profile was sharp against the glass, and for the first time, Eleanor saw her not as a formidable opponent, but as a woman who had watched her son grieve himself into a grave and was desperate to prevent her grandson from doing the same. He was happy, the dowager said finally. Infuriatingly, recklessly, stubbornly happy. He used to say Catherine was worth everything. Every sacrifice, every social consequence, every door that closed. She was worth it. And near the end? What did he say near the end? The dowager's composure cracked. Just a fracture, just enough for Eleanor to see the grief underneath. Vast and old and carried alone for 6 months because someone in this family had to stay standing. He said the pain of losing her was the price of having loved her, and he would pay it again, every day, without hesitation. Silence filled the room. Not the aggressive silence of confrontation, but something softer, something shared.
Your Grace, Eleanor said gently, I know you're afraid. You watched your son love someone and lose her, and spend the rest of his life broken by it. You don't want that for Adrian. I understand. Any grandmother who loved her grandson would feel exactly the same. Don't presume to tell me what I feel. I'm not presuming, I'm recognizing it. Because I'm afraid too. I'm afraid of not being enough, of embarrassing him, of watching society tear us apart while he regrets choosing me. I'm afraid of every single thing you warned me about. Then why are you here? Because my mother told me something once. She said being afraid of the wrong thing is worse than being afraid of nothing at all. She said most people spend their lives afraid of getting hurt, when what they should really fear is getting to the end and realizing they never tried. Eleanor stood. She crossed to where the dowager sat and knelt beside her chair. Not in submission, but in honesty. Eye to eye. Woman to woman. Two people who loved the same man and were terrified for different reasons. I can't promise you it won't be hard, Eleanor said. I can't promise society won't talk. I can't promise there won't be days when both of us wonder if this was a mistake. But I can promise you this. I will never let him disappear into duty and grief the way his father did. I will fight for him every single day. I will make him present. I will make him live. And if that's not enough for you, if my name and my station and my circumstances are more important than your grandson's happiness, then tell me now, and I'll leave. For good this time. The dowager stared at her. The clock on the mantel ticked. Outside, London carried on with its business of being London, oblivious to the war being fought in this small sitting room between an old woman's fear and a young woman's courage. You remind me of Catherine, the dowager whispered. She knelt in this exact spot, said almost the same words, bold and foolish and absolutely certain she was right. Was she? The dowager reached out and took Eleanor's hand. Her grip was cool and papery and surprisingly strong. Yes, she said, she was. Eleanor's breath caught. I don't approve, the dowager continued, and her voice was firm even as her eyes glistened. I think this is reckless and impractical and will cause more scandal than I care to imagine. People will say terrible things. Some doors will close permanently. You will be tested in ways you cannot yet comprehend. I understand, but I won't stand in your way. The dowager squeezed her hand once, hard. If this is what you both want, truly want, I'll support it publicly. I'll manage the narrative. I'll ensure the transition is handled with as much grace as possible. A ghost of a smile crossed her face.
And I reserve the right to say I told you so if it all goes horribly wrong." Eleanor laughed. It came out wet and shaky and real. "Thank you, Your Grace."
"Don't thank me yet. We have an enormous amount of work to do." The dowager released her hand and picked up her embroidery with an air of someone returning to battle. "You'll need a proper sponsor. Better references than whatever Charlotte's been cobbling together. And for heaven's sake, we need to get you out of that gray dress before anyone else sees you. If you're going to be talked about, you might as well look magnificent while they do it." Eleanor stood, wiped her eyes, and walked to the door. She opened it to find Adrian in the hallway, leaning against the wall, his face drawn tight with anxiety. "Well?" he said. She said yes. He closed his eyes, let his head fall back against the wall, released a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his chest for days. "She also said she reserves the right to say, 'I told you so,'" Eleanor added. "She always does." He opened his eyes, looked at her. "Are you sure about all of this?" "No, I'm not sure about any of it, but I'm doing it anyway." He pulled her to him, held her. Not a kiss. Something quieter, something deeper. Just his arms around her and his face pressed against her hair, and the sound of his breathing steadying, evening out, becoming the breathing of a man who had finally stopped drowning. The Pemberton Charity Ball was the last great event of the season, and by the time invitations went out, all of London knew that the Earl of Thornfield would be attending with Miss Eleanor Winters on his arm. Not as his sister's guest, not as a temporary arrangement, as his chosen companion, publicly and unmistakably. The Dowager had spent 3 weeks managing the narrative with the precision of a military campaign. Eleanor was introduced to key society figures through carefully orchestrated teas and morning calls. Charlotte spread the romantic version of their story through every drawing room in London. The Earl, who'd found love unexpectedly. The gentle-born young woman, with the education and grace to match any titled lady. The fairy tale that was too charming to resist. Not everyone was charmed. Lady Vivian and her mother left London for the country in a display of wounded dignity. Several old families made their disapproval known through conspicuous absence. Lord Barton told anyone who'd listen that standards were slipping. Eleanor didn't care. She'd survived worse than whispers. She'd survived poverty and loss, and her brother's debts, and Mrs. Calloway's back room, and the slow, grinding erasure of every dream she'd ever had. Gossip was nothing compared to that. The sapphire gown was the dowager's doing. Deep blue silk with silver embroidery, cut by Madame Laurent with the kind of artistry that made people stop talking mid-sentence when Eleanor entered a room. "If they're going to stare," the dowager said, inspecting the final result with her gimlet eye, "give them something worth staring at." Adrian was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He looked up, saw her, and this time he didn't say she looked appropriate, or well-chosen, or suitable. He said nothing at all. He just stood there with an expression that made Charlotte sigh and the dowager mutter something about theatrical young men. "Ready?" he asked when she reached him. "No." "Good. Neither am I." They arrived at the Pemberton together. The whispers began before they cleared the entrance, a rustling tide of curiosity and judgment and grudging fascination. Eleanor kept her chin up and her hand steady on Adrian's arm, and reminded herself that she'd faced the Dowager Countess of Thornfield on her knees in a gray cotton dress. A ballroom full of gossips was nothing after that. Adrian led her to the center of the floor. The music was already playing, a waltz, as if the universe had a sense of humor, and he turned to face her with the formal precision of a man about to do something deeply improper. "Miss Eleanor Winters," he said, his voice carrying across the sudden hush, "would you do me the honor of this dance?"
It was a simple question, but in the weighted silence of that ballroom, with 500 pairs of eyes watching and 500 judgments forming, it was everything. "The honor is mine, Lord Ashford." They danced, alone at first, because no one else dared take the floor while the Earl and his scandalous choice held it. Then, gradually, other couples joined. Charlotte with a young lord who'd been courting her all season. Then the Whitfield sisters with their partners. Then more and more, until the floor was full, and the whispers had softened into something that might, with enough time and enough waltzes, become acceptance.
"I spoke to your father last week," Adrian said as they turned.
Eleanor's eyes widened.
"You did what?"
"I went to your house, formally asked his permission to court you. Properly this time. No arrangements, no Marcus Holly, just me, sitting in your parlor, asking your father if I could marry his daughter."
"What did he say?"
"He said, and I quote, 'If she's fool enough to want you, I won't stand in her way.' Then he offered me tea in a cup with a crack in it, and asked if I'd read any Keats." Eleanor laughed, a real laugh, bright and unguarded, and several nearby couples turned to look. "I also settled Daniel's debts," Adrian continued, "quietly, through Marcus. Your brother thinks he won at cards, but the games were rather dramatically arranged in his favor."
"Adrian, you can't just—"
"I can, and I did. Your family situation is no longer precarious. Whatever you choose now, you choose freely, not out of desperation, not out of obligation. If you're with me, it's only because you want to be." The music soared toward its conclusion. Eleanor looked at this man, this stubborn, grieving, generous, terrified man who'd spent 6 months hiding from his own heart and was now standing in the center of a ballroom, daring London society to judge him. "I want to be," she said, "more than anything I've ever wanted." The waltz ended. They stood in the center of the floor, and Adrian, the Earl of Thornfield, the man who never did anything inappropriate, dropped to one knee in front of 500 witnesses. The ballroom gasped. "Eleanor Winters," he said, "you spilled wine on my coat and changed my entire life. You made me want to be present instead of performing. You told me the truth when everyone else told me what I wanted to hear. You fought my grandmother on her own ground and won, which no one in the history of this family has ever done." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd.
"You taught me that love isn't a weakness. It's the bravest thing a person can do. Will you marry me?"
Eleanor looked down at him, this man on his knees, offering her not a title or a fortune or a fairy tale, but something far more valuable, himself. Broken and mending, and brave enough to ask for help with the mending. "Yes," she said, 1,000 times yes." He stood and kissed her right there, in the center of the Pemberton ballroom, in front of everyone. It was scandalous and impractical, and the Dowager was going to have words about it later, and Eleanor didn't care. She kissed him back with everything she had, every fear she'd swallowed, every hope she'd buried, every night she'd spent reading Keats by candlelight, and pretending she wasn't in love with a man she had no business loving. The crowd's reaction was mixed, applause from some quarters, shocked silence from others. Charlotte was openly weeping. The Dowager stood at the edge of the room with an expression that managed to be simultaneously disapproving, resigned, and, if you knew where to look, proud. She nodded once, just once, but it was enough. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in the Ashford House library, her library now, as much as it had ever been anyone's, cataloging the book collection. It was a project the Dowager had suggested, surprisingly, and Eleanor suspected it was the older woman's way of saying she'd accepted her. Not with words. The Dowager didn't do acceptance with words. She did it with tasks, small, practical acknowledgments that Eleanor was here to stay. She was shelving the Keats, Its proper place, Adrian insisted, was wherever Eleanor happened to be, when a folded paper slipped from between the pages and drifted to the floor. She picked it up, unfolded it. The handwriting was not Adrian's. It was looser, warmer, slanted slightly to the right. His father's hand, the same hand that had written, "This is what it feels like to be alive," in the margins all those months ago. It was a letter, addressed to Adrian, never sent. "My dear son, if you're reading this, I've already gone. I'm sorry for that. Sorry for the burden I've left you. Sorry for the grief I know you'll carry because you are so much like me, and I carried mine until it nearly crushed me. But I want you to know, your mother was worth it. Every moment of joy, every moment of loss. The pain of losing her was the price of having loved her, and I would pay it again every morning for the rest of eternity. Don't make the mistake I almost made. Don't choose safety over happiness. Don't let grief convince you that feeling nothing is better than feeling everything. It isn't. Numbness is not peace. It's just a slower way of dying. Find someone who makes you brave, Adrian. Someone who won't let you hide. Someone who tells you the truth, even when the truth is hard. And when you find her, hold on with everything you have. The title and the estates and the responsibilities will still be there tomorrow. But love demands you be present today. Be brave, my son. Be present. Be alive. Your loving father." Eleanor's hands were shaking when she finished. She was still standing there, reading and rereading the letter through blurred eyes, when Adrian found her. "What's this?" He saw her face, saw what she held, went pale. "I found it in the Keats. I think he put it there for you to find." Adrian took the letter, read it slowly. His jaw worked, his eyes glistened. When he finished, he sank into the leather chair, his father's chair, and held the paper against his chest exactly the way Eleanor had held the Keats on the carriage ride home all those weeks ago. Pressing words against the wound, hoping they'd heal what couldn't be spoken. "He knew," Adrian said hoarsely. "He knew what I'd need to hear." Eleanor knelt beside his chair, took his free hand. "He knew his son, that's all. He knew you'd need permission to choose happiness." "I miss him." "I know. He would have loved you. He would have taken one look at you and said something impossibly kind, and then read you Keats until you cried." "That sounds wonderful." It was. It was the best part of growing up in this house. They sat together in the quiet library, surrounded by books and memory, and the long shadow of a man who'd loved enough for a lifetime and left behind the words to prove it. Eventually, Adrian pulled Eleanor up into his lap and held her close. She could feel his heartbeat against her shoulder, steady, present, alive. "Thank you," he murmured. "For what?" "For spilling wine on my coat. For being brave enough to come back. For fighting my grandmother in a gray cotton dress. For teaching me that love isn't the thing that breaks you. It's the thing that puts you back together." Eleanor smiled against his chest. "You're welcome. Though technically, I think we taught each other. Before you, I thought surviving was enough. I thought if I just kept my head down and worked hard and didn't want too much, I'd be safe. And now? Now I know that safe isn't the same as alive, and alive is worth the risk." Outside, London went on being London. Society went on whispering. The dowager went on embroidering and managing and making pointed comments about proper decorum that everyone knew she didn't entirely mean. Charlotte went on being Charlotte, bright and fierce and loyal to the bone. Daniel found honest work managing the household accounts, which Marcus Holly called a criminal waste of talent, but which suited Daniel perfectly. And Marcus himself stayed on as the family's unofficial consultant for situations requiring creativity and moral flexibility, kept on a very short leash that he regularly tested. And every year, on the anniversary of the evening that started it all, Adrian and Eleanor attended the Pemberton Charity Exhibition. They stood in the same gallery where a tired seamstress had stumbled into an earl's arms and spilled red wine across his white evening coat. And every year, without fail, Eleanor leaned against Adrian's shoulder and let her eyes close. Not because she was tired, because it was theirs, their accident, their beginning, their proof that the best things in life don't come from planning or scheming or playing it safe. They come from stumbling, from falling, from being brave enough to stay down long enough to see who reaches out a hand, and brave enough to take it.